Today I'm going to read for you an article written by Laurence Freeman. He is a political economic analyst for Africa. He is an outspoken opponent of the current policies of neo-colonialism. He is a highly respected teacher, writer and speaker on a variety of topics concerning Africa. An outspoken critic of the ICC attacks on African countries, Freeman also led a delegation of American state legislators to Sudan, who subsequently exposed the charges that the Khartoum government was engaged in slavery as fraudulent, insisting that Africa no longer be forced to live in a dark age. He consistently brought African governments a roadmap for transformative infrastructure projects. As the author of dozens of articles and reports on Africa, having traveled to the continent 25 times, Freeman served as a member of AFRICOM's advisory committee under US General Kip Ward. Most recently, he was appointed vice chairman of the Lake Chad Basin Scientific Committee and is currently working on a project to replenish the shrinking Lake Chad. Presently, he is teaching courses on the history of Africa, utilizing his decades of experience and knowledge. On November 29, 2020, Laurence Freeman wrote about Ethiopia's current situation. He wrote entitled Ethiopia's Conflict, a War Won to Preserve the Nation State. I will read it all in the whole article, and then I will try to say it in Amharic as well. Today, the Ethiopian government is reporting that the National Defense Forces have taken control of the city of Mekelle, the capital city of Tigray, as well as the airport. This portends the effective defeat of the opposition forces that violently rebelled against the nation over 3 weeks ago and the liberation of Tigray region. Notwithstanding criticisms by some spectators, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed was obligated to respond with force to safeguard the sovereignty of Ethiopia, in a similar manner to US President Abraham Lincoln's all-out war to preserve the Union. The nation-state, which Prime Minister Abiy was defending, is not a coalition or association of separate states or semi-autonomous regions. Rather, it is a unique sovereign concept of self-governing that transcends various ethnic or religious beliefs. The nation-state is uniquely required to serve all its citizens and ensure the posterity of its people. That's why throughout history, bloody wars have been fought to preserve the precious nation-state above all other considerations. The military conflict was not a civil war, but more precisely, it was a war to preserve the integrity of Ethiopian nation. Prime Minister Abiy launched the now victorious military campaign against the leadership of the TPLF, Tigray People's Liberation Front, not against the people of Tigray. The immediate cause of the government's offensive was in response to an early morning attack by the TPLF on November 4th on the northern command post of the Ethiopian National Defense Force, located in Mekelle. This assault, which murdered many soldiers and seized equipment and ammunition, was deemed by the Ethiopian government as crossing the red line. The government was compelled to respond with full force to save the nation. No nation could continue to exist if it allowed its armed forces to be slaughtered. A 6-month state of emergency for the Tigray region was declared by the Council of Ministers on November 6. The stated intent of the government is to arrest and bring to justice a small TPLF criminal clique that has been funding and mobilizing to destabilize the nation. TPLF rejects Abiy's reform. To understand the underlying origin of this conflict requires reviewing the modern history of Ethiopia. In 1991, the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, a coalition of forces, overthrew the fascist Derg regime and took over control of the government of Ethiopia. For the next 27 years, the TPLF not only governed the northern Tigray region, but as well exerted unparalleled influence over the central government and the other ethnic regions of the country. A year after he was elected by the EPRDF to become the new prime minister in April 2018, Prime Minister Abiy initiated a democratic reform process that included replacing the country's narrowly focused ethno-national parties with a new nationwide prosperity party. 3 regional parties that were part of the EPRDF coalition joined the new prosperity party as equals, in effect dissolving the EPRDF. However, the TPLF refused to accept losing its dominant political power. It voluntarily declined to join the new party, leaving TPLF isolated with weakened political power. Ethiopia's constitution and its federation of a central government coexisting with regional ethnic states was formed as a compromise to various ethnic nationalities that historically had been marginalized. This dubious arrangement indicates the ethnic pressures prevalent in Ethiopia, which must be overcome to unify the nation. Considerations should be given to modifying the constitution following next year's national elections. It's now imperative to reinforce a national Ethiopian identity that transcends ethnic nationalism. This is what Prime Minister Abiy intended with his reforms and the creation of non-ethnic prosperity party. Confronted by open rebellion from the TPLF leadership, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed had no choice but to respond forcefully, otherwise the very existence of Ethiopia would be put in danger. In harmony with his Madamar philosophy, Prime Minister Abiy proclaimed that all Ethiopians should accept responsibility for their past offenses, and all should be forgiven. He embraced the belief that the state should be wiped clean of the past, in order for Ethiopian society to unite in a common pursuit of prosperity for all. Without concern for the future of Ethiopia, the TPLF rejected Prime Minister Abiy's outlook and proceeded to commence an open rebellion against the Ethiopian nation. Abiy acted to preserve Ethiopia. Prior to attack, the soldiers of the Ethiopian National Defense Force in Mekelle, which the TPLF viewed as a foreign army, the TPLF disregarded national election law. After Ethiopia's elected government, the House of People's Representatives postponed national elections in March of this year due to circumstances resulting from COVID-19 pandemic. The TPLF conducted its own illegal elections in Tigray in September, violating the nation's decree. Prime Minister Abiy charges the TPLF leadership of trying to derail his transition, making the country ungovernable by instigating religious and ethnic conflicts and inciting violence against the central government in Addis Ababa. Although Prime Minister Abiy is an Oromo and he is the first non-Tigrayan to become Prime Minister since 1991, he is acting in the interest of all Ethiopians, not simply or narrowly on behalf of his ethnic origin. If Prime Minister Abiy were to allow the TPLF to defy federal law and initiate an armed attack on the defense force of the federal government without responding as he has, this would encourage other ethno-separatist movements to flout the authority of the nation. Thus, contrary to what people might have wanted to believe, Prime Minister Abiy's military campaign to subdue the reckless TPLF leadership was the best way to prevent the conflict from becoming a civil war. Brian Bruton, the DC-based Atlantic Council Africa Center, argues that the intuitive calls for negotiation endangered the future of Ethiopia. In her blog, Post-Ethiopia, calls for negotiation are driving Ethiopia deeper into war. Written before the defeat of the TPLF, she wrote, "The most effective means of discouraging the continuation of this conflict is to finally put pressure on TPLF leaders to stand down in the interest of protecting the local population. Abiy urgently needs to be persuaded that he can rely on the international community and not only his army to ensure that the TPLF will be prevented from returning to power." Counterintuitively, the fastest way for the international community to do that is to stop calling for negotiations and to start demanding accountability for the TPLF. Calling for negotiations, as so many are advocating, will only encourage TPLF leaders to believe that violence will permit them to fight their way to a bigger chair at the table. That's not only a losing strategy in Ethiopia, it sets up an extraordinarily dangerous precedent for the next armed insurgents that want us to challenge central authority. Ethiopia is East Africa's leader in economic development and a key nation providing stability into the Horn of Africa. There are confirmed reports that the TPLF fired missiles across the border into Eritrea and on the Bahar Dar and Gondor airports in Amhara, Ethiopia. Thus, it's clear that the TPLF posed an immediate danger not only to Ethiopia but to the entire region and had to be defeated. Lincoln waged war to save the Union. US history records a troubled and dangerous time when the army of the federal government came under attack. 6 weeks after Abraham Lincoln was elected President of the United States on November 6, 1860, South Carolina seceded from the Union on December 20 and demanded the removal of all federal troops. On December 26, 1860, Major Robert Anderson of the U.S. Army in South Carolina moved his 68 troops into Fort Sumter, an island in the Charleston Harbor. Immediately following his inauguration on March 4, 1861, President Lincoln was confronted with the threat of the dissolution of the United States. South Carolina, one of the 7 states that formed the Southern Confederacy on February 1861, insisted that the federal Fort Sumter belonged to them and commenced a siege around the beleaguered federal troops. President Lincoln had to make the most momentous decision of his 2-week-old presidency, which he knew would impact the very existence of the United States, whether to send supplies to the troops or relinquish the fort. In the words of author Doris Godwin, Lincoln must make the decision between a surrender that might compromise the honor of the North and tear it apart, or a reinforcement that might carry the country into civil war. On April 6, President Lincoln told the governor of South Carolina he would send provisions to the troops, no arms or ammunition. In response, Jefferson Davis, provisional president of the Confederacy, ordered Major Anderson to surrender the fort, which he refused. The Civil War officially began at 4:30 in the morning of April 12, when the Confederacy fired on Fort Sumter. President Lincoln rightly considered Fort Sumter as an outpost of the federal government, and thus an attack on the fort was an attack on the United States. Within days, President Lincoln issued a call for 75,000 volunteers to join the Union Army to defeat the Southern Rebellion and secure the very existence of the nation. In President Lincoln's second inaugural address on March 4, 1865, he discussed the reason for the federal government's war against the rebel South. He remarked that while he was seeking to save the Union without war, insurgents were seeking to destroy it, seeking to dissolve the Union and divide effects by negotiation. The South, he said, would make war rather than let the nation survive, and the North would accept war rather than let it perish. President Lincoln made clear in this address and throughout his entire tenure as president that he would spare no effort, including the tremendous loss of life, to preserve the Union. The Confederacy, supported by the British, intended to abolish the Union, had to be defeated at the dreadful price of 750,000 soldiers perishing in combat. Americans and all people of the world should give thanks to that President Lincoln was victorious and that the United States of America survived as a foreign nation, as a sovereign nation. No moral equivalency. Throughout the entirety of the 4-year-long war, President Lincoln would only describe the enemy of the Union as a Southern rebellion. He never recognized the legitimacy of the Confederacy of Southern States because to President Lincoln there was only one government representing all the United States. Former Ethiopian Prime Minister from 2012 and to 2018, Hailemariam Desalegn espoused a correlated judgments in regard to the TPLF. In his argument, Ethiopia's government and TPLF leadership are not morally equivalent. On November 24, he admonished the international community's view of the conflict. The key problem is the assumption of moral equivalence, which leads foreign governments to adopt an attitude of false balance and both-sidism. He continued, in the meantime, those who are advocating dialogue with the TPLF leadership should carefully consider the full implication of what they are calling for, as they will open a Pandora box that other ethnic-based groupings are ready to emulate. Those calling for talks should understand that the very prospects of negotiating with the TPLF's current leadership is an error, as a matter of both principle and prudence. While Prime Minister Abiy was not fighting a civil war, analogous to President Lincoln, he was forced to make decisions that would determine the very existence of Ethiopia. Nations must be supported against separatists, ethnic or religious movements that attempt to tear apart the fabric of national sovereignty. All human beings, regardless of where we were born, are united by our universal innate potential and creativity. The power of our creative soul is what makes us distinctively human, unique from all other species. It's our common heritage. The nation-state exists to promote the creative potential of all its citizens, from the past to present and into the future. Thus, its value to civilization is inimitable and must be safeguarded at all costs. አሁን ደግሞ በአማርኛ ተርጉሜ ሀሳቡን አቀርብላችኋለሁ። ሎረንስ ፍሪማን የኢትዮጵያ መንግስት አዲስ አበባ ያለው ማዕከላዊ መንግስት ከትህነግ ወይም ህወሓት ከሚባለው ቡድን ጋር ወደ ግጭት ከገቡ በኋላ በኖቬምበር 29 የኢትዮጵያ መንግስት ኃይሎቹን አሰባስቦ የትግራይ ዋና ከተማ የሆነችውን መቀሌን ተቆጣጥሯል። ከዛ በኋላ ያለው ነገር በውጭ ሀገር ያሉ ወይም ዓለም አቀፍ ማህበረሰቡ ያለው እይታ ምን እንደሚመስል እና እየተነገረ ያለው ነገር ትክክለኛው ነገር ምን እንደሆነ ለማብራራት የሞከሩ ሰው ናቸው። የሰውየው አስተማሪ ናቸው፣ ይጽፋሉ፣ በአፍሪካ ጉዳይ በጣም ይተነትናሉ። እናም እኔ ጥሩ ሆኖ ስላገኘኋቸው ነው ሙሉ አርቲክላቸውን አንብቤ ትርጉሙን በአጠር አድርጌ አቀርብላችኋለሁ ማለት ነው። ሎረንስ ፍሪማን እየተናገሩ ያሉት የአብይ መንግስት እየሞከረ ያለው ነገር ለኢትዮጵያ ሉዓላዊነት መከበር እንደሆነ ነው የተናገሩት። ምንጊዜም የአገር ሉዓላዊነት ከምንም ከማንም ነገር መቅደም ያለበት ነው። በየትኛውም ሀገር ላይ ያሉ ሉዓላዊ አገሮች ከ200 በላይ የሆኑ ሀገሮች አሉ ዓለም ላይ ቅድሚያ የሚሰጡት የአገር ግዛትን ሉዓላዊነትን ያስቀድማሉ። የትኛውም ሀገር አሜሪካም፣ እንግሊዝም ወይም ሌላውም ማለት ነው። ጦርነቱ በትግራይ ህዝብ ላይ አለመሆኑን፣ ጦርነቱ የተካሄደ ያለው በትህነግ ቡድን ላይ መሆኑን እንደሆነ ህዝቡ ሊያውቅ ይገባል፣ የዓለም አቀፍ ማህበረሰቡ ማለት ነው። የትህነግ ቡድን ወይም የህወሓት ቡድን ላለፉት 2 እና 3 ዓመታት የጠቅላይ ሚኒስትር አብይ አህመድ መንግስት ወደ ስልጣን ላይ ከመጣ በኋላ እያሳየ ያለው ድርጊት ከፍተኛ የሆነ ለሀገሪቱ በሰላም መኖር በጣም ፈታኝ ከመሆኑም በላይ በአካባቢው ባሉ ሀገራት ሁሉ ላይ ስጋትን የፈጠረ እና የደቀነ መሆኑን ነው የሚያሳየው። ለዚህም ጦርነቱ ከተጀመረ ወይም ግጭቱ ከተጀመረ ጀምሮ የተለያዩ የሚሳይል እና የሮኬት ጥቃቶችን ወደ ኤርትራ እና ወደ አጎራባች ወደሆኑ የአማራ ተብሎ በሚጠራው ግዛት ውስጥ ጎንደርና ባህር ዳር አካባቢ በተላኩ ሮኬቶች አካባቢውን ዲስታብላይዝ ወይም ደግሞ ረፍት መንሳት ያሳያል ማለት ነው። ይሄ ቡድን ፍላጎቱ ድርድር ሳይሆን በኃይል ልጫንባችሁ ወይም ደግሞ ፍላጎትን መጫን ነው። በማንኛውም መልኩ ተገንጣይ ቡድኖች ወይም የሃይማኖትም ይሁን የጎሳ ሊደገፉ አይገባም ይላሉ ሎረንስ ፍሪማን። ይህም የሚሆነው ምክንያቱም አንድነት ብዙ ጥቅሞች አሉት ከመለያየት ይልቅ አንድነት። ምክንያቱም አገራት በክፉም ይሁን በደጉ ለብዙ ዓመታቶች ኖረዋል። ልክ እንደ ቤተሰብ ማለት ነው። በክፉም በደጉም አብረው የኖሩ ስለሆኑ በጋራ የመኖሩ የበለጠ ጥቅም ስላለው ተገንጣይ ቡድኖች ሊደገፉ አይገባም። ለዚህም ምሳሌ የሚወስዱት ፕሬዚዳንት አብርሃም ሊንከንን ነው። ፕሬዚዳንት አብርሃም ሊንከን በ1860ዎቹ ወቅት ስፔሻሊ 1861 ዓመተ ምህረት ላይ ከደቡብ ግዛቶች ውስጥ ያሉትን የተገንጣይ ቡድኖች በተለይ በካሮላይና በምትባለው ግዛት ከኮንፌዴሬት ከስቴቱ ለመውጣትና የፌዴራል ጦር ላይ ጥቃት በማድረሷ ምክንያት የአብርሃም ሊንከን መንግስት ወደ ጦርነት እንደገባና በዛም 750,000 የአሜሪካውያን ዋጋ ከፍለው የአሜሪካ ግዛት አንድነትና የዩናይትድ ስቴትስ እንደ አንድ ኔሽን እንድትቆም ምክንያት ሆኗል። ስለዚህም ጠቅላይ ፕሬዚዳንት አብርሃም ሊንከን እስካሁን ድረስ አንጸባራቂ እና በታሪክ የሚወሱ እንቁ የሆኑ የአሜሪካ ፕሬዚዳንት ሆነው ሲዘከሩ የሚኖሩ መሪ ናቸው። የዓለም አቀፍ ማህበረሰብ የውሸት እኩሌታን ፈጥሮ ትህነግን፣ ህወሓትንና የማዕከላዊ መንግስቱን በትይዩ ማስቀመጥ ፈጽሞ ስህተት ነው። ይሄ በተለይ የቀድሞ ጠቅላይ ሚኒስትር ኃይለማርያም ደሳለኝ በቅርቡ ከተናገሩት ወስዶ የተጻፈ ነው። የዓለም አቀፉ ማህበረሰብ የትህነግ የህወሓት ቡድንና በአዲስ አበባ ያለውን የአብይ አህመድን አድሚኒስትሬሽን በእኩሌታ የማየት ነገር ይታያል። ይሄ ፈጽሞ ስህተት እንደሆነ ማስቀመጥ ይገባል ማለት ነው። እኩል አይደሉም። ወይም ደግሞ በእኩሌታ መቀመጥ ለትህነግ ቡድን ድርድር ማስቀመጥ ማለት ማንኛውም በጎሳ የተደራጀ እና የታጠቀ ኃይል እጅ ጠምዝዞ ፍላጎትን መጫን ይችላል። ይሄ በየትኛውም ሀገር ላይ ለአገሩ ዳር ድንበር ሊዋደቅ የተቀመጠን ቡድን ወይም ሊዋደቅ የተቀመጠን የጦር ኃይል ወይም መከላከያ ሰራዊት ላይ ከፍተኛ የሆነ ፍጅት የፈጸመን ቡድን እንቀመጥና እንወያይ ብሎ ማለት የትኛውም ሀገር ላይ ተከስቶ አያውቅም። በየትኛውም ሀገር ላይ ተደርጎ አይቀመጥም እና ይሄ ማለት የመጨረሻ ሽንፈት ነው። ይሄንንም ደግሞ አስረግጦ ለአካባቢው ሰላም ለመፍጠር ይሄንን ማድረግ ማለት ወይም ከትህነግ ህወሓት ቡድን ጋር ድርድር መቀመጥ ማለት ማንኛውም ግሩፕ በጎሳ የተደራጀ ኃይል እና ጦር መሳሪያ ይዣለሁ የሚለውን ኃይል የፈለኩትን ጦር ከያዝኩኝ የፈለኩትን ማድረግ እችላለሁ፣ እጅ መጠምዘዝ እችላለሁ ማለት ነው። ይሄም ሊደገፍ አይገባም ማለት ነው። ሎረንስ ፍሪማን የኢትዮጵያ መንግስት ከመጪው ምርጫ በኋላ ዜግነትን የሚያስቀድም የፖለቲካ ስርዓት ማንበር ይገባዋል፣ ይህም ህገ መንግስቱን ከማሻሻል ይጀምራል ይላሉ። ስለዚህ ኢትዮጵያ ይታወቃል፣ ብዙ ሃይማኖት፣ ብዙ ጎሳ፣ ብዙ ቋንቋ የሚነገርበት ሀገር ቢሆንም በተቻለ መጠን ከሚቀጥለው ምርጫ በኋላ የህገ መንግስት ማሻሻል እንዴት አይነት ስርዓት ማንበር እንዳለባቸው ዜግነት፣ ኢትዮጵያዊነት ዜግነትን ማስቀመጥ ይገባቸዋል። ለምሳሌ ጠቅላይ ሚኒስትር አብይ አህመድ ባለፈው መቀሌን ከተቆጣጠሩ በኋላ ለፓርላማው ንግግር ያደረጉበት ንግግር ሰምታችሁ ከሆነ በአሁኑ ሰዓት ወጣቶች ወታደር ወይም መከላከያ ሰራዊትን ውስጥ ገብቶ ሰልጥኖ መከላከያ ሰራዊት ወታደር መሆን አይፈልግም ብዙ ወጣት ብለዋል። ነገር ግን በዛ ተቃራኒው ግን ወጣቶች በየክልላቸው አሁን ክልል ተብሎ በሚጠሩበት አካባቢ የልዩ ኃይል አባል ለመሆን ግን ፍላጎታቸው በጣም ይታያል። ይህ ማለት ምንድነው? አሁን እንደምንመለከተው ኦሮሚያ የሚባለው ክልል ይሄን ያህል ሺህ የልዩ ኃይል አስመረቀ፣ ትግራይ የሚባለው ይሄን ያህል ሺህ አስመረቀ፣ ደቡብ የሚባለው ይሄን ያህል ሺህ አስመረቀ እየተባለ እንሰማለን። ይህ ማለት ምንድነው የሚያሳየው? ሰዎች ለመከላከያ ወይም ደግሞ ለኢትዮጵያ መከላከያ ሰራዊት መመልመልን ለምን አልፈለጉም? ልዩ ኃይል ውስጥ ለምን መግባት ፈለጉ? ይሄንን መስተካከል ያለበት ከህገ መንግስቱና አጠቃላይ የኢትዮጵያ ስርዓት፣ ዜግነት፣ አገራዊ አንድነት እና ኢትዮጵያዊነት የሚለው ነገር መታየት አለበት። እንደገና ሪቫይዝ መደረግ አለበት። እንደገና መታየት አለበት። ይሄ ከምርጫ በኋላ ኢትዮጵያን ሊረዳት ይችላል ብለው ሐሳባቸውን ይሰጣሉ። እኔም በተቻለ መጠን አጠር አድርጌ ነው ሐሳብ የሰጠሁት። አመሰግናለሁኝ ስለ አዳመጣችሁኝ። ተጨማሪ የተለያዩ አዝናኝም እንደገና ቁም ነገርም ያላቸው ጽሁፎችን አቀርባለሁ። ለዚህም ሰብስክራይብ በማድረግ እንድትተባበሩኝ ጠይቃለሁ። ሰብስክራይብ አድርጉ፣ ሼር አድርጉ። አመሰግናለሁ።